The dust storm that rolled through Fort Laramie in the summer of 1876 left everything coated in a fine layer of grit. But nothing looked more defeated than the young woman standing alone outside Beaumont's trading post with a carpetbag at her feet and tears cutting clean tracks down her dirty cheeks. Clara Hartwell pressed her back against the rough wooden wall and tried to make sense of how her entire world had collapsed in the span of a single afternoon. Her cousin Josephine, the woman who had promised to take her to California for a fresh start, had simply vanished while Clara was inside purchasing thread, leaving nothing behind except a short note tucked into Clara's bag that read, "I cannot afford 2 passages. Forgive me." The stagecoach to Sacramento had already departed, taking Josephine and every last cent Clara owned, money her cousin had convinced her to pool together for their journey west. Clara was 22 years old, alone in a territory she did not know, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a bag containing 2 dresses, a brush, and the worthless note. She had no family to return to in Ohio, her parents having succumbed to fever 3 years prior, and the factory work she had left behind would not take her back even if she could afford passage east. The trading post behind her bustled with trappers, soldiers, and settlers, but she felt utterly invisible among them, just another piece of prairie flotsam blown in by circumstance and likely to blow away just as quickly. She was trying to formulate some kind of plan, any plan at all, when a shadow fell across her. Clara looked up to find a man standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands and concern evident in his dark eyes. He was tall and lean, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell past his collar. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy, worn but clean, and there was something gentle in his expression that made her not immediately afraid despite her vulnerable position. "Miss, I do not mean to intrude, but I saw you sitting here for quite some time now," he said, his voice low and careful. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Clara's first instinct was to deny it, to preserve what little dignity she had left, but what was the point? Her situation was obvious to anyone with eyes. "My cousin left me here," she heard herself say, her voice cracking. "She took my money and left me behind. The stagecoach is gone, and I have nothing." Saying it aloud made it feel more real, and a fresh wave of tears threatened to spill over. The cowboy's jaw tightened, a flash of anger crossing his features before his expression softened again. "That is a low thing to do to family," he said quietly. He shifted his weight, seeming to consider something carefully before speaking again. "My name is Thomas Riversong. My mother was Lakota, my father a trader. I have been working cattle down south, and I am heading back north to my mother's people near the Powder River. If you need to get somewhere, perhaps I could help." Clara stared at him, unable to comprehend such kindness from a complete stranger. "I could not possibly ask that of you. I have no way to pay you back." Thomas knelt down so they were at eye level, his expression earnest. "I am not asking for payment. What was done to you was wrong, and I have the means to help. Where were you trying to go?" "California," Clara whispered. "My cousin said there were opportunities for women there, work in the hotels and restaurants in Sacramento. But that seems impossible now." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Sacramento is a long way from here, and the stage routes there are expensive. But there are other places with opportunities. Helena in Montana Territory has been growing fast since they found gold there. It is closer, and it is on my way north. I could buy your passage there, and I would ride along to make sure you arrive safely. It is a mining town, so there will be plenty of work for someone willing. Clara searched his face for any sign of ulterior motives, any hint of the danger her mother had always warned her that strange men could pose. But all she saw was genuine concern and an earnestness that seemed almost out of place in this rough country. "Why would you do this for someone you do not even know?" "Because someone once helped my mother when she needed it most," Thomas said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do, no one should be left stranded like this." What choice did she have? Clara could stay here and hope for some miracle, or she could accept this unexpected kindness and at least have a chance at survival. She took a shaky breath and nodded. "Thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay you, but thank you." Thomas smiled then, a warm expression that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "Come on. The stage to Helena leaves tomorrow morning. Let me buy your ticket, and we can get you somewhere safe to spend the night. Mrs. Patterson runs a boarding house near here that is respectable." He offered his hand, and Clara took it, letting him pull her to her feet. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long, and she stumbled slightly. Thomas steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow, then picked up her carpetbag as though it were his own burden to carry. Clara followed him through the dusty streets of Fort Laramie, still half convinced this was some kind of dream born of desperation. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a two-story structure that looked sturdy and well-kept, with lace curtains in the windows and a small garden out front that somehow thrived despite the harsh climate. Mrs. Patterson herself was a round, motherly woman who took one look at Clara's tear-stained face and immediately ushered her inside, clucking about the state young women could find themselves in on the frontier. Thomas explained the situation in brief, tactful terms, and Mrs. Patterson's expression hardened when she heard about Josephine's betrayal. "That girl will have to answer for that someday," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You stay here tonight, dear. Mr. Riversong, you are welcome to take supper with us and we can settle the arrangements." Over a simple but hearty meal of stew and bread, Clara learned more about her unexpected benefactor. Thomas had been raised between two worlds, spending winters with his mother's Lakota family and summers with his father's trading business. When his father died 5 years ago, Thomas had taken to cowboy work, but he regularly returned to spend time with his mother and her people. He spoke of the land with a reverence that Clara had never heard before, describing the northern plains as though they were a living thing deserving respect and care. "It is hard country," Thomas said, "but it is honest. It does not lie to you about what it is or what it demands. I have found more truth in the wind over the grasslands than I ever did in any town." Clara found herself drawn in by his words, by the quiet passion in his voice. She told him about her life in Ohio, about working in the textile mill after her parents died, about how Josephine's letters had painted California as a place where a woman could make her own way without being beholden to factory bosses or societal expectations. "I suppose I was naive to believe it could be so simple," she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Wanting a better life is not naive," Thomas replied. "Trusting the wrong person with that dream is just unfortunate, but it is not the end of your story, Miss Hartwell. Helena may not be California, but it is full of people who remade themselves. You can do the same." That night, lying in a clean bed in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, Clara let herself cry properly for the first time. She cried for the loss of her dreams, for the betrayal of family, for the frightening uncertainty of her future. But underneath the grief and fear was something else, something small but growing: hope. A stranger had shown her kindness when he had no reason to, had offered help without demanding anything in return. If such goodness could exist in this harsh place, perhaps she could find her way after all. Morning came too quickly. Clara washed her face in the basin, changed into her better dress, and packed her few belongings with hands that only trembled slightly. Thomas was waiting downstairs, his own gear already loaded on a strong-looking bay horse tied outside. He handed her a ticket for the stagecoach, and Clara held it like it was made of gold. "The stage makes several stops before Helena," Thomas explained as they walked to the depot. "It will take about a week, depending on weather and road conditions. I will be riding alongside, so if you need anything at the stops, just let me know." The stagecoach was already being prepared, the driver checking the horses while other passengers began to gather. There was a merchant and his wife, a grizzled prospector heading back to his claim, and a young minister traveling to establish a church in one of the mining camps. Clara climbed aboard, settling herself near the window so she could watch Thomas as he mounted his horse. The journey north was both grueling and strangely beautiful. The landscape rolled past in endless variations of brown and gold and green, broken by dramatic rock formations and sudden river valleys. The stagecoach rattled and bounced over rough roads, making conversation difficult, but at each stop Thomas was there, helping her down from the coach, making sure she had food and water, offering his coat when the evening chill set in. He never presumed, never pressed too close or made her uncomfortable. He was simply there, a steady presence that Clara found herself relying on more with each passing day. At one stop, a way station run by a French-Canadian family, Thomas bought them both coffee and they sat outside watching the sun set over the mountains in the distance. The sky turned shades of orange and purple that Clara had never seen in Ohio, colors so vivid they seemed unreal. "Does it always look like this?" she asked, unable to look away from the spectacle. "When the conditions are right," Thomas said. "My mother used to tell me that sunsets like this were the Creator painting the sky to remind us of beauty in a hard world. I think she was right." Clara turned to look at him, at the way the fading light caught in his dark hair and threw his profile into sharp relief. "Do you believe in God?" she asked, surprising herself with the personal question. Thomas considered this carefully. "I believe in something greater than myself. My mother's people have their understanding of the sacred, and my father had his. I have found that the truths in both are not so different as some would claim. What about you?" "I used to," Clara admitted. "When my parents died, I asked God why. I never received an answer that satisfied me. But yesterday, when I was abandoned and alone, you appeared. I do not know if that was God or simply luck, but I am grateful either way." Thomas met her eyes and something passed between them, an understanding that felt significant even though Clara could not name it. "I am glad I was there," he said quietly. "I do not believe we meet people by accident." They rode on, and with each day Clara felt herself changing. The fear and grief that had consumed her began to give way to something else. She found herself looking forward to the stops, to the conversations with Thomas, to the way he pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the land and its people. He spoke of his mother's resilience, of how she had faced prejudice and hardship but maintained her dignity and her traditions. He spoke of the changing West, of how the buffalo were disappearing and the old ways were being destroyed, and there was sorrow in his voice that made Clara's heart ache. "I am sorry," she said after one such conversation. "I know my people are responsible for much of that destruction." Thomas shook his head. "You are not responsible for what others have done. We can only choose our own actions, our own path. You have shown me kindness and respect, and that is what matters between us. The word hung in the air, implying a connection that Clara realized she wanted to explore. When had this stopped being simply a stranger helping her out of obligation? When had Thomas become someone whose smile made her heart beat faster, whose absence during the long hours in the stagecoach left her feeling incomplete? On the 5th day of travel, they ran into trouble. A wheel on the stagecoach broke on a particularly rough stretch of road, and the driver announced they would need to stop for repairs that would take several hours. The other passengers grumbled, but Thomas took it in stride, helping Clara down from the coach and leading her to a shady spot by a creek while the driver and the prospector worked on fixing the wheel. "Would you like to walk a bit?" Thomas asked. "Stretch your legs properly." "We will be able to see the coach from the creek path," Clara agreed, grateful for the chance to move. They walked along the water, listening to it burble over smooth stones. Thomas pointed out tracks in the mud, teaching her to identify what animals had been there. "Deer," he said, "and possibly a fox." Clara found herself fascinated, realizing how much of the world she had moved through without really seeing it. "You love this life," she observed. "The open spaces, the freedom of it?" "I do," Thomas admitted. "Though it is not always easy, there is loneliness in it too." Most places I go, I am too Indian for the white folks and too white for some of the tribes. My mother's people accept me because of her, but I have always existed between worlds." Clara stopped walking and turned to face him. "That must be very difficult. I am sorry you have faced that." Thomas smiled, but there was sadness in it. "It has taught me to judge people by their actions rather than their appearances. It has taught me that belonging is something you build, not something you are born into." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "Clara, I hope you do not mind me using your given name. We have been traveling together for days now, and Miss Hartwell seems too formal." "I do not mind," Clara said, her heart racing at the intimacy of it. "And you should call me Clara." "Clara," he repeated, and the way he said her name, soft and warm, made something flutter in her chest. "I want you to know that when we reach Helena, I will help you get situated, find you a respectable boarding house, and help you look for work. I will not just abandon you there." "Thomas, you have already done so much." "I know I have no right to say this," Thomas interrupted, his words coming faster now as though he was afraid he would lose his nerve. "I know we have only known each other for days and you have been through a terrible ordeal. But I want to say it anyway, because I have learned that life is too short and too uncertain to leave important things unspoken." He took a breath, his dark eyes locked on hers. "These days traveling with you have been the best days I have had in longer than I can remember. You are kind and brave and stronger than you know. When I look at you, I see someone I want to know better, someone I want to spend more time with. If you feel nothing for me, I understand. I will still help you get settled in Helena, and I will not trouble you. But if there is any chance that you might feel something too, I would like to court you properly, if you would allow it." Clara's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such honesty and vulnerability. She thought of how Thomas had appeared when she needed help most, of his steady kindness throughout their journey, of the way her spirits lifted whenever she saw him riding alongside the coach. She thought of how she had begun to imagine a future that included him, conversations that went on for years instead of days. "Thomas," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I have been trying not to let myself feel anything because I was afraid. Afraid that I was only drawn to you because you saved me, afraid that I was being foolish after what Josephine did, afraid that you were just being kind and I was reading too much into it." She stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. "But the truth is that when I see you, I feel safe. When you speak, I want to listen to every word. When you are gone, I miss you. I do not know if that is love, not yet, but it is certainly the beginning of something." The smile that spread across Thomas's face was like sunrise, bright and transforming. "That is more than I hoped for," he said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from hard work, warm and strong. "I will court you properly. I will give you time to be certain of your feelings. And Clara, I promise you, I will never give you cause to regret trusting me." They stood there by the creek, hands joined, and Clara felt something settle in her chest that she had not even realized was unsettled. When they returned to the stagecoach, the other passengers gave them knowing looks, but Clara found she did not care. Let them think what they wanted. For the first time since her parents died, she felt like she was moving towards something instead of just running away. Helena, when they finally arrived, was a town bursting with energy and chaos. The gold strikes in the nearby gulches had drawn people from all over, and the main street was a confusion of freight wagons, horses, miners, merchants, and workers of every description. Buildings were going up so fast that the sound of hammering was constant, and the air smelled of sawdust and coal smoke and ambitious dreams. Thomas helped Clara down from the stagecoach, and they stood together surveying the scene. "It is overwhelming," Clara admitted. "It is," Thomas agreed. "But there is opportunity here, just like I said. Let me help you find a place to stay, and then we can look for work for you tomorrow." They found a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a Chinese woman who had come to Montana with her husband during the gold rush and stayed after he died. She ran a clean, orderly establishment, and after a brief conversation with Clara and Thomas, agreed to rent Clara a small room at a rate that was steep but manageable if Clara could find work quickly. "I know the manager at the Grand Hotel," Mrs. Chen said in accented but clear English. "They are always looking for good workers. I will write you a letter of introduction if you like. You seem like a respectable girl." "Thank you," Clara said gratefully. "I will work hard, I promise." That night, after getting Clara settled, Thomas prepared to ride on to his mother's village, which was still several days north. The goodbye was harder than Clara had anticipated. They stood outside Mrs. Chen's boarding house, and Clara felt tears threatening again, but for a different reason than before. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. "A few weeks at least," Thomas said. "I need to see my mother, bring her supplies, spend some time with her, but Clara, I will come back. I promise you that, and when I do, if you will have me, I want to continue courting you properly." "I will be here," Clara said. "I am not going anywhere." Thomas reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small pouch. "I want you to have this. It is not much, just a little money to help you get by until you find work. Please take it. It will ease my mind while I am gone." Clara wanted to refuse, had already accepted so much from him, but the practical part of her knew she needed it. "I will pay you back," she said firmly. "Only if you insist," Thomas said with a smile. Then, very carefully, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Be safe, Clara Hartwell. I will be thinking of you." She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the Montana twilight, and pressed her hand to where his lips had touched her skin. Then she turned and went inside to begin building her new life. The work at the Grand Hotel was hard but honest. Clara was hired as a housemaid, responsible for cleaning rooms, changing linens, and helping in the dining room during busy hours. The manager, Mr. Fitzpatrick, was a stern Irishman who demanded perfection but paid fairly and treated his workers with respect. Clara threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction and the purpose it provided. She made friends with the other workers, particularly a young woman named Sarah who had come from St. Louis and worked in the hotel kitchen. Sarah was bold and funny, full of stories about the colorful characters who came through Helena, and she took Clara under her wing, showing her the best places to shop for necessities and warning her which parts of town to avoid after dark. "You have that look," Sarah said one day as they were folding linens together. "The look of a woman with someone on her mind. Is he handsome?" Clara felt herself blush. "He is, but more than that, he is kind. He helped me when I had nothing, expected nothing in return." "A rare breed," Sarah said approvingly. "You hold on to that one." The weeks passed slowly. Clara saved every penny she could, determined to pay Thomas back and to build her own security so she would never be as vulnerable as she had been at Fort Laramie. She wrote him a letter, though she was not entirely sure where to send it, addressing it generally to the Powder River country and hoping it might find him. In it, she told him about her work, about Helena, about how she thought of him every day. Then one afternoon in late August, as Clara was returning to the boarding house after her shift, she saw a familiar bay horse tied outside. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she broke into a run, decorum forgotten. Thomas was standing on the porch talking to Mrs. Chen, but he turned at the sound of her footsteps and his face broke into that brilliant smile. "Clara," he said, and then she was in his arms, propriety abandoned in her joy at seeing him. He held her tight, his face buried in her hair, and Clara felt complete in a way she had not since he left. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised I would," Thomas said. "Did you think I would not?" "No, I knew you would. I just missed you so much." Clara pulled back enough to look at him, taking in every detail. He looked well, perhaps a bit leaner, with a new scar on his chin. "What happened?" she asked, touching the scar lightly. "A disagreement with a stubborn horse," Thomas said with a laugh. "The horse won, but it is nothing serious." His expression grew more intent. "Clara, these weeks away from you were torture. Every day I thought about you, wondered if you were well, if you had found work, if you were happy. I saw my mother, spent time with her people, but my heart was here with you the entire time." Mine was with you too, Clara confessed. Thomas, I know it has not been long, but I am certain now. What I feel for you is real. It is not just gratitude or circumstance. I love you. She saw his eyes go wide, saw the emotion cross his face before he cupped her cheeks gently in his hands. Clara, I love you too. I think I have from the moment I saw you at that trading post, looking so lost and brave at the same time. I want to build a life with you if you will have me. I know I do not have much to offer. I am a cowboy, a man caught between two worlds, but I will work hard. I will do everything I can to make you happy. You already make me happy, Clara said, tears streaming down her face now, but they were good tears, joyful tears. I do not need wealth or status. I need someone who treats me as an equal, who respects me, who loves me. You are all of that and more. Mrs. Chen, who had been watching from the doorway with unabashed interest, cleared her throat. Perhaps you two should have this conversation somewhere more private, she suggested, but her eyes were twinkling. Thomas laughed and took Clara's hand. Will you walk with me? I want to tell you everything, and I want to hear everything about your time here. They walked through Helena as the sun began to set, talking rapidly, trying to compress weeks of separation into a single conversation. Thomas told her about his mother, about how she had given them her blessing when he told her about Clara, about the changes happening on the plains as more settlers pushed into the territory. Clara told him about her work, about Sarah and the other friends she had made, about how she had saved nearly every penny of her wages. I can pay you back now, Clara said, reaching for the small purse she kept pinned inside her dress. Thomas stopped walking and took both her hands in his. Clara, I do not want you to pay me back. That money was freely given, no strings attached. What I want, what I have wanted since the moment I rode away from here, is to marry you. I want you to be my wife. Clara's breath caught. Are you proposing to me, Thomas Riversong? I am, Thomas said seriously. I know we should probably wait longer, do this more traditionally, but I cannot stand the thought of being apart from you again. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to build a home with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. If you need more time, I will wait. But if you feel the same, if you want this too, then why should we wait? Clara thought about everything she had been through, about how her life had fallen apart and then been rebuilt into something better than she could have imagined. She thought about the kind of man Thomas was, about his integrity and his gentleness and his strength. She thought about how she felt when she was with him, seen and valued and loved. The answer was easy. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I will marry you, Thomas. I want all of those things too. Thomas let out a whoop of joy that turned heads all down the street, then picked Clara up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time, his lips warm and gentle against hers, and Clara felt like she was floating. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony performed by the young minister who had been on the stagecoach with them from Fort Laramie. The minister remembered them both and seemed delighted to be officiating their union. Sarah stood up for Clara, and Thomas asked the blacksmith he had befriended, a freed slave named Joshua who had come west after the war, to stand with him. Mrs. Chen hosted a small celebration at her boarding house, cooking a feast that blended Chinese and American dishes, and the few friends they had made in Helena came to wish them well. Clara wore a new dress she had sewn herself from fabric she purchased with her saved wages, simple blue cotton but clean and pretty. Thomas wore his best clothes and had gotten a haircut, though Clara privately preferred his hair longer. When the minister pronounced them man and wife, and Thomas kissed her in front of everyone, Clara felt a sense of rightness that she had never experienced before. This was where she was supposed to be, with this man, beginning this life. They could not afford much, but Thomas had saved his wages from his cowboy work, and combined with what Clara had earned, they were able to rent a small cabin on the outskirts of Helena. It was rough, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs. Thomas found work at a nearby ranch, breaking horses and working cattle while Clara continued her work at the hotel. The hours were long and the work was hard, but they were building something together, a foundation for their future. The first winter was difficult. Montana winters were harsh in ways that Clara, even coming from Ohio, had not fully anticipated. The snow piled high, the wind cut like knives, and there were days when it was so cold that going outside was dangerous. But their little cabin stayed warm thanks to the stove Thomas had installed and the firewood he stockpiled, and Clara found that being snowed in with her husband was not a hardship at all. They talked for hours, read aloud from the few books they owned, and made love by firelight while the wind howled outside. It was during that first winter that Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas on Christmas Eve, presenting it as a gift, and watched his face cycle through shock, joy, and a touch of fear before settling on determination. "We will be good parents," he said, his hand on her still flat belly. "Our child will know love and security. They will know both sides of their heritage and be proud of all they are." Their son was born in early September of 1877, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him James, after Clara's father, with the middle name Takoda from Thomas's Lakota heritage, meaning friend to everyone. James was a sweet-natured baby who rarely cried, and both Clara and Thomas fell completely in love with him. Clara took time away from the hotel to care for James, and money was tight, but they managed. Thomas took on extra work, and Clara did sewing and mending for other families to bring in additional income. They were tired all the time, but they were happy, watching their son grow and change every day. When James was 6 months old, they made the journey north to introduce him to Thomas's mother. It was Clara's first time meeting Walking Dove, and she was nervous, afraid that she would not be accepted or that she would somehow fail to measure up. But Walking Dove, a small woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that saw everything, took one look at Clara and James and pulled them both into a warm embrace. "My son's heart is in his eyes when he looks at you," Walking Dove said in careful English, though Thomas had told Clara his mother spoke much better than she let on around strangers. "You have made him happy. That makes you family." They spent 2 weeks with Walking Dove's people, and Clara learned about Thomas's heritage in a way that reading or hearing stories could never teach. She learned to tan hides, to make pemmican, to recognize different medicinal plants. The women of the village accepted her cautiously at first, but when they saw how much she wanted to learn, how respectfully she approached their traditions, they warmed to her. By the time they left, Clara felt she had gained not just a mother-in-law but an entire extended family. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas continued his work with horses, developing a reputation for his skill and patience, and eventually he was able to start his own small horse-trading business. Clara went back to work at the hotel part-time once James was older, and they saved carefully, planning for the future. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Mary Walking Dove when James was 3, and another son, William, 2 years after that. Their little cabin became too small, so Thomas and Joshua, the blacksmith, who had become a close friend, built an addition, expanding it into a proper house with separate bedrooms for the children and even a small parlor. Clara planted a garden that, against all odds, produced vegetables and even some flowers. She learned which plants could survive the Montana climate and which were hopeless, and she took pride in feeding her family food she had grown herself. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters when money was scarce, illnesses that terrified them until the fever broke, moments of prejudice and ignorance from people who looked at Thomas's dark skin or heard Clara's children's mixed heritage and made ugly assumptions. But Thomas and Clara faced everything together, a united front, and they taught their children to be proud of who they were, to stand up for themselves, and to judge others by their character rather than their appearance. When James was 10, he asked his parents how they had met, and Clara and Thomas looked at each other and smiled. They told him the story, how Clara had been abandoned and afraid, how Thomas had helped her with no expectation of return, how a journey meant to be an ending had become a beginning. James listened with wide eyes, then declared that when he grew up, he wanted to be just like his father, someone who helped people who needed it. "You can be better than me," Thomas said, ruffling his son's hair. "You can be yourself, the best version of yourself. That is all your mother and I want for any of you." As the years passed, Helena grew from a rough mining town into a more established city. It became the capital of Montana Territory, and then in 1889, Montana achieved statehood. Thomas and Clara celebrated with their children, explaining the significance of the moment, how they were watching history happen. Thomas's horse trading business continued to grow, and eventually he was able to purchase land outside Helena, a beautiful spread with good grazing and a creek running through it. They built a new house there, larger and more comfortable, though Clara insisted on bringing some furnishings from their first cabin, wanting to remember where they had started. Walking Dove passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1891, and Thomas grieved deeply for the mother who had raised him to walk between worlds with dignity. They brought her body back to her people for a traditional burial, and Thomas's children learned about their heritage through ceremony and song. Clara held her husband while he wept, grateful that his mother had lived long enough to know her grandchildren and see her son happy. Clara's friendship with Sarah had endured over the years, and when Sarah married a mine engineer named Patrick, Thomas and Clara stood up at their wedding just as Sarah had stood up at theirs. The two couples and their children spent holidays together, their friendship one of the great joys of Clara's life. Sarah often joked that she had known Clara was in love before Clara herself had realized it. "You got that dreamy look whenever you mentioned him," Sarah would say, laughing. "I knew you were a goner from the start." As their children grew older, each one developed their own personality and dreams. James, true to his childhood declaration, became known for his fairness and kindness, eventually studying law and becoming an advocate for fair treatment of the remaining native tribes in Montana. Mary inherited her father's gift with animals and worked alongside Thomas in the horse business, proving herself just as skilled as any man despite those who doubted her. William became a teacher, opening a school that welcomed children of all backgrounds, determined to provide the kind of education that acknowledged different cultures and histories. Thomas and Clara watched their children's successes with immense pride, knowing that the life they had built together had given their children the foundation to become whoever they wanted to be. Their house was always full of noise and activity, with grandchildren arriving as James, Mary, and William married and started their own families. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Clara on a trip, leaving the children and grandchildren in Mary's capable hands. They traveled to California, finally reaching the destination Clara had originally dreamed of all those years ago. They stayed in Sacramento for a week, and Clara was able to see the city her cousin had promised her. But as they walked its streets, she felt no regret about the path her life had taken instead. "You ever wonder what would have happened if Josephine had not left you behind?" Thomas asked as they watched the sunset over the Sacramento River. Clara considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I think about it," she admitted, "but I cannot imagine a version of my life without you, without our children. What Josephine did was cruel, and it caused me terrible pain in the moment. But it also put me exactly where I needed to be to meet you. I would not change that for anything." Thomas pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I thank God or fate or whatever power guides the universe every day that I rode into Fort Laramie when I did. You are the best thing that ever happened to me," Clara River song. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down but their love never diminishing. Thomas eventually handed over the daily running of the horse business to Mary and her husband, though he still spent time in the stables, unable to fully give up the work he loved. Clara finally retired from the hotel, though she continued her sewing and volunteer work, helping new arrivals to Helena adjust to frontier life, always remembering what it felt like to be alone and afraid in a strange place. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, and Clara looked around at the family they had created, at the life they had built from nothing, and felt overwhelming gratitude. She thought about that terrified young woman sitting outside the trading post, convinced her life was over, and wished she could go back and tell her younger self that everything would not just be okay, it would be better than she ever imagined possible. Thomas seemed to read her thoughts. He took her hand across the table, his grip still strong despite his age, and smiled at her with the same warmth that had captured her heart 40 years earlier. "No regrets?" he asked softly, a callback to a question he had asked many times over their years together. "Not a single one," Clara replied, and meant it with her whole heart. As the years continued to pass, they remained each other's constant companion and greatest love. They sat together on the porch of their house, watching the Montana sky paint itself in those impossible colors Thomas's mother had told him about as a child, holding hands like young lovers, grateful for every moment they had together. Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Clara beside him holding his hand. He simply did not wake up one morning, his heart having given out after a long, full life. Clara grieved deeply, feeling as though part of herself had been torn away, but she also felt gratitude that they had been blessed with so many years together, that he had not suffered, that their last words to each other the night before had been, "I love you." At Thomas's funeral, attended by what seemed like half of Helena and beyond, person after person came to tell Clara stories about her husband's kindness, his integrity, his generosity. Many people, she learned, owed Thomas debts of gratitude for help given quietly, without fanfare or expectation of recognition. He had spent his life living by the same principle that had brought them together, helping those who needed it simply because it was right. Clara lived another 8 years after Thomas's death, surrounded by her loving family, spending her days with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing down stories about their heritage, about the early days of Montana, about a cowboy who had helped a stranded young woman and fallen in love. She told them about the importance of kindness, of helping others, of judging people by their actions rather than their appearance. She passed away quietly one autumn evening, sitting in her favorite chair with a blanket Mary had made her tucked around her shoulders, looking at a photograph of Thomas that she kept on the table beside her. Her last conscious thought was of him, of the way he had looked that first day at Fort Laramie, had in his hands and kindness in his eyes, and she felt nothing but joy. They buried her next to Thomas on a hill overlooking their land, with a view of the mountains in the distance and the sky stretching endlessly above. Their children made sure the headstone told their story simply but completely. Thomas and Clara River Song, he helped when help was needed. She loved with her whole heart. Together they built a life and a family that changed their world. And though they were gone, their legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names, their values, and their story forward. James's legal work led to improved treaties and protections for Native peoples in Montana. Mary's horse ranch became one of the most respected in the state, known for its fair dealing and excellent stock. William's school educated hundreds of children, teaching them to value all cultures and see the humanity in everyone. The story of how Thomas and Clara met became a family legend, passed down through generations. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be, and that kindness offered freely can change everything. It was a story about love found in unexpected places, about two people from different worlds who built a bridge between them and created something beautiful. It was a story about the Wild West, but also about something timeless and universal. The power of compassion, the strength of partnership, and the extraordinary things that can grow from the smallest seed of kindness planted at exactly the right moment. And it was, most importantly, a love story, one that began with a cowboy buying passage for a stranded woman and rode alongside her not just for a single journey, but for the rest of their lives.